Welcome back to the Prepper Report. This segment is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a discussion of what I put together as the 10 most popular gun myths, and we're going to debunk them. We have a great panel here. We have, again, Kim Stolfer from Firearms Owners Against Crime, as well as Keith Savage, who's our guest from Braverman Arms. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So without any delay, let's put on the 10 most popular gun myths. Gun myth number 1, guns are evil.
Well, that's a surprise because I always thought of them as nothing more than a complicated mechanical device. There's no evil involved. It's when the people misuse them. And as a matter of fact, many people get a lot of enjoyment out of shooting them for recreation and competition.
Yeah, there's, it's really in the hands of the person using it more than what the device actually is. I agree 100% with Kim on this.
Okay, let's go to gun myth number 2. Gun myth number 2 is assault weapons like the AR-15 and the AK-47 are death machines and should be banned.
Well, first off, if you don't mind, I'd like to
Go
take
ahead.
this. I personally, myself, when I deal with somebody who comes in or asks me for an assault weapon, I basically tell them, I don't know what you're referring to. I've never liked that term. I don't like the fact that other dealers have accepted that term, because what it comes down to is I can hit you with the book. I've assaulted you. The book was my weapon, so therefore it's an assault weapon. So I think the term is, it was created to create fear and to get people's blood boiling, is what it comes down to in my opinion. And again, guns don't do it, it's people.
I agree with Keith. And like I have said before, is that Josh Sugarman and the Violence Policy Center created the assault weapon term in 1988, specifically to, in their own documents, confuse people as to the difference between semi-automatic and fully automatic machine guns. And that really is the difference in the criteria, because the reason that they have such a problem at the national level defining it when they try to create legislation is there is no difference between, and I'm sure Keith can speak to this too, between a Remington 7400 series hunting gun and an AR-15. There's no difference. You can buy magazines, you can make them. They're the same caliber, so there really isn't any difference in a semi-automatic except for the cosmetics. And I refuse to buy into that, and this assault weapon terminology is just ridiculous.
I've actually brought with me, I don't know if the camera's going to be able to see that, but 3 different calibers here, which I always find interesting for display. As I'm sure both of you are familiar, the one on my far left is the .22 long rifle, which I understand from some statistics is the most lethal. Well, that is, most deaths and most injuries are caused by the .22 LR, even though it's little. This is what the ban that they're discussing. One of the rifles, like the AR-15 that you discussed, is a .223 or a 5.56.
The death machine gun
Right.
bullet.
But what's interesting, what I always find fascinating, is that this is a common hunting caliber, which is a .30-06, and if you can, I think anybody out there is able to see that that is going to be more powerful, more lethal than either of those 2 calibers and those 2 rounds. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you bring up an interesting subject, one that has been studied by academicians and economists and sociologists, is that if these types of rounds right here, the M16 round, the AR-15 round, they use the same caliber, are no longer available to the public. And criminals are going to substitute. And when they substitute, they're going to substitute more lethal firearms. And trauma units won't be able to deal with it. They substitute this, you're going to have far more deaths because criminals are going to do that, and there's not going to be anything holding them back.
Yeah, I agree. Currently, from what I'm hearing, and Kim might be able to elaborate a little bit more, being as that his son served in the military, is they are looking at new calibers because the .223 is ineffective at longer distances, and in close quarters it's taken multiple shots to actually stop somebody. So you take that off the market and they're just going to go to the next thing.
Keith is right. There have been major studies about this. That caliber is completely inefficient. It's not even allowed to be used in Pennsylvania for hunting, even in bolt action rifles, manually operated rifles, because it's too small. And then they say it's a death-dealing machine. And by the way, I can show anybody within 10 minutes with a brazing torch how to make an extended magazine up to 50 rounds.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there.
Okay.
Let's go on to the next myth. Gun myth number 3. We need to close the gun show loophole. Now, we discussed this briefly during the debate. Would either of you like to?
Keith, go.
Yeah, I've heard this term, and it infuriates me because there is no loophole. I am required as a dealer to do paperwork, whether at a show or at my store. I am required to do that, and I don't know what the term gun show loophole comes from. I don't understand, simple as that, and I don't agree with it.
Strictly speaking, it's a great term to increase the passions of the public, thinking that there's some kind of giant bazaar here where everybody nefariously comes in and gets guns. But Keith just told you, and he's a dealer, he can show you. There is no type of nefarious activity going on here. But what does go on?
You just reminded me of the scene from Star Wars where Luke Skywalker walks into the bar over there with all the creatures.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. And then take a look at what happens to the legislation. When you look at the gun show legislation that's come up, even a Republican has put it forward. We don't ascribe to any one particular party either. But what comes up is they increase the penalties on gun dealers and on gun show promoters, and they change what they are allowed to do, how they're allowed to display firearms, and they increase numerous regulations because they want to end gun shows, because that's where people of like mind get together, just like in garage sales, and talk to each other and have a good time just like we are. And they want to end that. And at the same time, they want to make it. The whole goal here with the gun control movement, like Josh Sugarman and Ceasefire PA and PA, is to limit the availability of purchasing firearms and to make sure that it's as difficult as possible and as expensive as possible. And you might find this interesting. Just bear with me just a second, Josh.
Let's make it quick because we have a lot of more myths to spell.
I'm just going to show you. Since 1994, where we began with this list, we had 11,552 gun dealers in Pennsylvania, registered FFLs. This, in the crusade against gun dealers and gun shows, this is what's left, about 2,100. So they always said if we can reduce gun dealers and the kitchen table people, we'll somehow magically reduce crime. Well, they reduced it all right. Did it work? No.
I find that interesting considering you have a photo of the president hanging in your store saying that he's the gun salesman of the year. You would think that there'd be more FFLs out there, not less.
Well, part of the problem where I agree somewhat with eliminating some of the FFLs comes from there were guys out there who had FFLs for 10 years, never did a transaction. And when asked by the BATF, why did you keep getting your FFL when you weren't selling a gun? The guy simply answered, why'd you keep cashing my checks? which is the ultimate answer. I mean, there was nothing he could say after that. The agent just said, you're correct. You know, we cashed your checks.
Yeah, they have the measures under the federal law to stop that.
Yeah.
And again, government's responsible for not doing their job. Go ahead.
Let's go on to gun myth number
Yes, sir.
4.
Sure.
Gun myth number 4. The Second Amendment was to arm militias, not individuals, and only applied to the muskets of the day, not today's militarized weapons.
I think that's your...
Can I have that one?
That's all yours,
Okay.
Kim.
Let's see. The word militia. In Title 10, Section 311, 312, and 313 of federal law, you will find militia still there. Every American citizen up until the age of 45 is in the militia, the unorganized militia. Now let's step back for that, because they talk about the Constitution. Nothing in the Bill of Rights was ever meant to empower government. It was meant to enshrine the individual rights of citizens. And no, just because they didn't envision television stations and cameras doesn't mean that the First Amendment still doesn't cover it. I'd like to think that everybody could agree on that. But the Second Amendment was put there with the same concept. The citizen, the right of the citizen to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state shall not be questioned. Pennsylvania, Article 1, Section 21. And everybody knows what the Second Amendment says, because it says,
Shall not be infringed.
shall not be infringed. And you're absolutely right. And it's time we start looking past this and stop giving away our freedoms. Because you want to talk about giveaway of freedom and nobody needs, like the prior guest that was on here, Dave Levdansky in the legislature, he took the same oath. And I'll tell you, I'm passionate about this. The same oath I did to support and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, when I entered the military. I was a United States Marine and I volunteered. I went to Vietnam. And I'm going to tell you something. We cannot allow that to happen. And if you want to allow that to happen, you have to realize the consequences.
Okay, let's go quickly. I'm sorry to skip you. We're going to go quickly to myth
That's
number
fine.
5. Gun-free zones keep us safer.
You know, I find that to be quite funny and humorous. In my opinion, the criminals are very much like electricity, path of least resistance. You hang that sign up, and they're going to go right for it, because the end of the day is they want to go home. And the bottom line is gun-free zones is a guaranteed no guns.
Our schools are supposed to be stewards and keep our children safe. They have a bond and a responsibility. Whether it be Sandy Hook or the recent shooting in California or the myriads of others, they do not do their job. And they should be held accountable, because when you hand your child off to these schools, they're saying we will hold them safe. And yet they can't. They don't have any measures in place. And the fact is that they don't have any concept of making people safe around these types of situations. So when we talk about gun-free zones, look at them. The shooting in the theater in Colorado, Aurora, Colorado. That theater was the only one of 5 within roughly about 1.5 miles. He bypassed closer theaters to go to that particular one, the Cinemark theaters. You know why? Because they didn't allow the carrying of firearms. He didn't want to get shot. In Oregon, at the shooting at the mall, it wasn't gun-free. Citizen with a law-abiding, lawfully carried firearm, he presents the firearm to the person, the shooter, and that goofball, sorry, don't mention their names, went to the top of the stairs and shot himself. He attenuated the killing in that mall because he thought it was a gun-free zone. So gun-free zones are nothing more than what we called in the Marine Corps free fire zones.
With that, we're going to go on to myth number 6. Myth number 6 is automatic weapons don't belong in the hands of civilians and shouldn't be readily available.
I think that's another one for you, Kim.
Automatic weapons will fire all of the ammunition with a single pull of the trigger. I think everybody here knows that. A semi-automatic firearm, whether it be a revolver or a gas-operated one, fires only one shot with every pull of the trigger. So why shouldn't they be available? And by the way, people can still buy machine guns if they so choose and pay a tax stamp and wait 6 months, and it's a long, laborious process.
My understanding, there's only been one crime since the NFA was passed in 1934 with an automatic weapon.
There have been 3, and every one of them was a police officer.
Okay. So let's move on to, I think we've debunked that, myth number 7. Myth number 7 is high-capacity magazines are not necessary for civilians and should be restricted to law enforcement and military.
I think, again, you're trying to blame an inanimate object. I mean, what does it do? Nothing. There's got to be somebody there to use it. There's got to be somebody there that takes it and does whatever a criminal's going to do with it. I think that there are some, whenever you go shooting, it's nice to be able to shoot and not have to constantly reload.
Back in 1901, we created what was called the Director of Civilian Marksmanship. It was to promote responsible and competent marksmanship in the public. These firearms are used every day in competitions thousands of times across this state at tiny little events and larger. But this, again, is part of the mystique. Just ignore that. Do we want people to die in situations where cops aren't in there, like LA riots in Katrina?
Or the young lady the other day that protected her family by being inside of a closet, and when the assailant came through the door, she shot him 6 times, but she had a revolver. What if there was a second or a third assailant on the crime scene? You could have, she would have been out of ammunition. She wouldn't be able to reload, and she would have been in a terrible position. Let's move on to the next myth.
Sure. Yes.
Next myth, myth number 8. If we ban guns like in the UK and Australia, violent crime will decrease as a result.
I don't see how that will happen. Again, you're taking away protection for some people who probably can't fight anymore. The older Pennsylvanians and older Americans that can't fight, and I don't see any other protection for them that could actually make it as equal.
This is one of the greatest lies that has just completely upset me, because it's a complete and utter fabrication. England has twice the violent crime rate that America does. The United Nations says England and Scotland are the most violent countries on the planet. When are we going to take and stop allowing these people, like Ceasefire, to come up with a term and throw us factoid at and not back it up? That's what Dave Levdansky did. That's what they do in Harrisburg. We work to fight for tougher laws, but we work for laws that hold criminals responsible and not law-abiding citizens. And if that's a loophole, then I'm afraid that some of us have to re-examine our priorities.
Next myth, gun myth number 9. What's wrong with stopping convicted criminals and the mentally ill from purchasing firearms? Keith.
What's wrong with it? I honestly, I don't know what to say.
Okay.
I am truly stumped at that question.
What would you have to say, Kim?
Just 2 components real quick. First, we believe in stopping criminals and mentally ill people that really deserve it. Not all of them do. Unfortunately, they have a broad brush with them as well. And they don't do anything about identity theft to stop criminals, and we don't do anything to follow the SSRI inhibitors, the antidepressants, and I think that if it gets to a certain point, I think the psychologists should be held to account as well. They were taking our freedoms.
Okay, let's go to the last of the gun myths for today, number 10. The straw purchases of guns and are rampant, and the root cause of illegally held guns. Keith.
Boy, unfortunately, straw purchase is something that I have to deal with. I don't deal with it on a daily basis. It is a problem, and unfortunately, it comes down to, it's generally coming back to females purchasing firearms for their drug dealers or their friends, because their friends have a right to protect themselves. Unfortunately, like I said, that is something that I deal with on a daily, I shouldn't say daily basis, but it is something that we see a lot of, and we make every attempt to stop it.
Kim?
Unfortunately, there are straw purchases that go on. Fortunately, we put into the law some teeth. The problem is it's not applied. Again, I referenced the 10 firearms that were straw purchased down here and sold right next to the station, but it's all over the state. The state police officer that was killed out east was killed by someone who straw purchased a bunch of firearms. When they caught him, suspended sentence. It goes on everywhere, but how can we say we're serious about stopping crime if we won't look at that?
Okay. And with that, we're going to end this segment of the Prepper Report. I thank you for visiting. I want to encourage everybody to go on to our website, jewishpreppers.com. Our website will definitely have a version of both the debate and this discussion. And I thank you for coming. Again, I want to thank Keith for coming in from Braverman Arms in Wilkinsburg, as well as Kim Stolfer from Firearms Owners Against Crime. Thank you very much, and join us again next week.